Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. My name's Rebecca. If you're new here, you're very welcome, and if you've been here before, then welcome back. This week we are in week 4 of our March Winging It project, and last week we got to this point here. And this week we're going to add some surface embroidery to really bring this piece to life. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, we are creating a standalone piece each month, and I'll link all the videos up here in a card so that you can go back and see what you might have missed. Don't worry about starting from the beginning though. Each piece is completely standalone and you can dip in and out of this year's project as and when you like. You can just pick up things that inspire you and leave out things that don't. I'm really excited about today's video because I love the way this piece is going. I hope you enjoy it too. So gather some threads and some needles and let's get stitching.
This is where we're up to so far. In week 1 we put in our background using inks and we added some slow stitch over the top, and then in week 2 we built our flowers and did some hellebores, daffodils, primroses, this lungwort and some forsythia, and then last week we added in our flower centres and we created our sari silk crocuses with little middles, and I've added this one in just because I felt like there was a bit of a space there that needed something more. So what we're going to do today is add some surface embroidery. So there are spaces in amongst the flowers and there's a little space here where we can add in some more colourful embroidery to add to our spring flowers. We also need some stems, I think, to join these together, and I want my flowers to sort of spread out into the background, which is why we kept this surface stitching in the background fairly neutral and fairly understated, just in shades of green with variegated green thread. So this is where I can bring in my box of colour scheme threads, and I've gone through my stash to find loads of different greens and purples and yellows. We have used some of these already, but I want to bring in some other colours as well just to make it look really vibrant. So I've also got some yellow sheepies thread as well, just for a chunkier thread that might add a little bit of variety as well. So I'm just going to pull some of these in here and there to add a little bit of detail. Some of these stitches might be new to you, some of them might just be fairly straightforward. I'm not going to do anything particularly fancy in terms of stitching, but we are, maybe if you're new to stitching, we are going to do some stitches that you might not have come across before, so I will kind of explain what I'm doing as I'm going along. So I'm starting off with some dark green thread. This is the darkest green that I've got, I think, and I'm just going to thread it up into my needle. So what I'm going to do is, I've knotted the end. As I say, when I'm doing something on quilt batting or on a padded background, knots really are fine because the quilt batting takes the pressure of the knot. So if I was working on a finer fabric, a linen or a cotton in a hoop, I probably would use a different method to start my thread because the knots will show through, and so you have to sort of know when it's safe to use knots and when it isn't, and as long as you've got felt or batting or something padded on the background, knots will be absolutely fine. So I'm going to start down here and I can just pull my flowers back whenever I need to, and if you want to you can stitch, you can sketch in a line. I'm just going to eyeball it, and what I want to do is create a stalk that these, or a branch that this forsythia is growing off. So I've brought my thread through, just pull back my daffodil here, just underneath my daffodil, and I'm going to use a stem stitch for this. You could use chain stitch, you could use back stitch and then whip it if you wanted to, but I really like the texture that stem stitch gives. So I want my thread to go above my stitches all the time, and I'm going to go one stitch length forward, take my needle down, and then I'm going to rock back to halfway along that distance that I've travelled, like that, and bring my needle through. Thread above my needle, and when I pull through I'm going to form like a letter T. That's what should happen. So I've got my stitch here and my thread's coming out beneath it. So I want to take my thread back over the top again, and this time I'm going to go a stitch length on, but my thread is starting halfway along my first stitch. So what I want to do is go that distance between my working thread and the end of the first stitch. I want to go on that distance again, and then when I rock my needle back I'm going to come up at the end of that first stitch, and that will give me a stitch length again, but my thread will now be halfway along the new stitch. So thread up again, come along a stitch length and go back to the end of the previous stitch and pull through like this. And so what happens is you get a line that is kind of textured, it's a little bit rope like, and it's a bit of a chunkier line. Now I am not deliberately creating a smooth line here, I want this to look organic, so I don't want smooth curves. I want my branch to sort of look like it's a little bit gnarly, that it's growing in kind of lumpy directions, and what will happen is as long as your thread is above where your needle goes down and you come back out at the end of the previous stitch, your stitches will work. And I've created a little bit of a V here because my stitch is going above that stitch. So when I put in my next stitch, let me just do it and show you. When I put in my next stitch, it creates almost like a lump on the branch, which I really quite like. Now if you were creating a flower stem and you wanted a smooth line, you wouldn't want to do anything like this, but I quite like making it look organic. And then my final stitch can disappear under that forsythia flower like that, and suddenly I've got a bit of a stem. Now if you wanted to, you could thicken that up by coming back in the other direction. So I've come back out and I'm just going to make another line of stitches that sort of weaves in with the line that I've just made. And this is where you can fill in that gap where you've made the V shape, so I can add a little bit more thread in there to smooth it out a little bit. So I'm making just quite a textured line for my branch. Using quite a messy stem stitch, I'm doing it deliberately. I'm all about learning the rules and then playing with them, so you can do super neat stem stitches that make beautiful stems for flowers and look absolutely perfect. it's a great stitch for outlining as well. You can make really neat outlines with stem stitch, but that's not what I want to use it for here. I want to create something that looks like a branch. So there we go. Let's see if I can bring this up to the camera a bit more. So I've got a really sort of gnarly looking branch there coming out of from underneath my daffodil, and that's going to join my forsythia together. So rather than having a massive trail of thread on the back, I'm just going to finish that thread off, re-knot it, and then I'm going to come up the other side of that forsythia flower, and I'm going to use the same technique to join these flowers up and make them look like they're all growing off a single branch. I want my branch to thin out as it gets towards the end. So I probably won't go back and do double layers beyond this section here, because I want this part of the branch to be much thinner, as if it's tapering away. Try not to pull your stitches too tight. There's a lot of texture on this piece and you don't want to flatten everything down for a start, so I'm working quite carefully to go in between the flowers, but you also don't want to pucker the fabric any more than it is, because otherwise it won't lie properly when you come to bind it and add it into your book or wall hanging. Now here I've got some flowers coming off the stem, so what I'm going to do before I finish off my thread is just add in a little straight stitch that kind of gives those flowers a reason for being there, and the same over here. So it's fine if the flowers are crossing the stem, it just looks like they're growing off that part of the stem, but if they're off to the side you might want to add a little stalk that shows where they're growing from. So here I'm going to do a sort of fork in the branch, so I'm going to have a bit of the stem coming off this way to this flower, and then I can make my branch go up into the corner of my piece, joining up those flowers so that they aren't just floating in space but they're actually growing off something. So I can tuck under that flower, come up the other side of it, let's have a little bit of crookedness in this branch here, like that, just so we've got plants growing off a stem. So hopefully you can see that stem going through there. Okay, so I've put in my forsythia stems and now I'm going to deal with my lungwort. So I've got some anchor thread 258 and I've got 2 strands. I had 3 strands for this, I think I forgot to say, but I've got 2 strands and we're going to do something approximating a satin stitch. So let's start over here. What I'm going to do is pull down. Remember, we're trying to create something that looks like bells, so I'm just going to pull down my flower and bring my thread up just at the side, cutting off the point of my fabric manipulation, and I'm just going to go straight across that point at the fold where we folded it up to make the flower shape, and go down at the other side, and then I'm going to come up next to that stitch and hop across again, making another stitch right next to the one that I've just made, and then I can come up again over on the side, on the first side rather, next to the stitch I've just made, hop straight across and make another stitch. And you don't have to be absolutely fastidious about this, you don't have to make it absolutely precise, but what you want to do is try and catch down the end and hide it. So we're trying to create that sort of I've got a feeling it's called a sepal on the flower, the bit that sort of holds all the petals together, and I'm just going to keep going until that pink point is covered in green. And if I think I need to go a bit lower to make it more like a bell, I can come up again where I started, but just to the other side of that stitch, and hop over again like that. And I'm going to do that on each of the flowers, and because they're quite close together, I'm not going to worry about finishing off my thread. I'm just going to hop across on the back, try not to catch in the wider part of the flower. So it's a bit like the part on the snowdrop that we did, that the sort of cup at the top of the flower that holds it all together. We did that in February when we made our snowdrop piece. It's a bit like that. So we're just using satin stitch, which is straight stitches laid really close together. That's all that satin stitch is, to make that little cup at the top of each flower. I'll do these and then I'll show you what I'm going to do next. So thank you so much for all the amazing comments that you left on the last video. It's I'm so delighted that you're liking this, because I've talked about this before, I think every single piece I ever stitch goes through what I like to call its awkward teenage phase, where you really wonder whether it's ever going to look right. And like I say often, if you don't like what you're making, it probably isn't finished, because I think if you keep going, use your intuition, you will find a way to make it work. And sometimes there are pieces that you have to abandon, like my first background for this. If you watched in week 1, this was not the original background that I made. I used ink for this one, but I started off using acrylic paint, and I can't remember who it was, but thank you to whoever it was who told me that you can actually get a medium to mix with your acrylic paint for using with fabric that keeps the fabric soft, and that I have got to get some. I've got to get some of that, because I really am enjoying creating my own backgrounds and using different media to create these pieces. So what I need is to be able to use all of the resources that I've got without wrecking my hands in the process. So when I used acrylic paint, it just made the fabric go really stiff, rock hard, and made it very unpleasant to stitch through. And I tried sort of breaking up the paint by putting it through a sewing machine, but it didn't really work in any sort of meaningful way, so I abandoned it and started again. So sometimes you do have to abandon what you're doing, but most of the time I think it's possible to just keep working on something, using your judgment to think about what it might need, and you just keep going until you find your way through and get a project that you enjoy. So if you don't like it, it's not finished yet, I think. So keep going, work out what it needs, and you'll end up loving what you make. So I have had my doubts about this piece at various moments, but I'm really encouraged by all your lovely comments and that you're feeling inspired by it and that you're enjoying the bright colours. And yeah, I'm just really glad that this one's working. I've put all my little caps in now, and what that's done is sort of trap those flowers much more into bell shapes, which is what we were after. So what I want to do now is add some stems. So again, I'm going to use, actually let's do a whipped back stitch. So I want to create a line. I want these to, I am aware that I'm stitching green on green. I'll get into the purple shortly, so hopefully it'll be a little bit easier to see. So I'm just pulling my primrose out of the way there with my thumb, and I'm just going to back stitch a line down from my lungwort stem. Some of this will be stitched over, so I'm not going to be too fussy. Just got two strands here still. So that's far enough. As soon as I'm far enough down, I'm going to bring my thread back up at the end of that line, and I'm going to whip those stitches. So I'm going to slide my needle underneath the previous stitch. I'm not going through the fabric, I'm just sliding under the stitch, and I want to go in the same direction under each stitch that I've just made, working my way back up that line. So I'm always going right to left, doesn't really matter which direction you go in, and this will even out any uneven stitches. That's the first benefit of whipping, but it also will make your line more solid and less sort of sketchy. I do like the sketchy line that back stitch gives, but here I want it to be a bit more solid. And then back down at the end, and then I can add another stem going up to this flower, and I'm just going to do exactly the same for each flower. So a back stitch line, and then coming up at the end and whipping along that line back down to where I started, and it creates a much more solid line. So these are just suggestions always. Everything I do is just a suggestion. I'm making my piece just to give you ideas, and then you can adapt these ideas to make something that is more you. So you don't have to follow this exactly if you don't want to. You can vary it, and like I keep saying, we've got people unbelievably to me watching from all over the world, and some of you in the southern hemisphere, so your experience of March is very different to mine here in rural Lincolnshire. So we're just coming into spring. If you're just coming into autumn, then you can adapt this and do some autumnal flowers. You could do leaves. Seen some amazing variations in the Facebook group, and if you don't know about that, there is a private Facebook group for anyone following this project, and the information is in the description below. It's free, so you just need to request to join and agree to the group rules, and I will approve your request, and then you can see what everybody else is up to. So do post. I want to encourage you to post. It's a really supportive group, really safe place, and if you've never posted your work before, then can I heartily recommend it, because you get so much encouragement. Everybody's so lovely. So there we go, we've got our little lungwort flowers coming down from behind our daffodil there. So I'm going to do the same with all of the others, and then we'll come back and start adding some more floral embellishments.
I just wanted to dive in and tell you about something really exciting that's happening in the next couple of weeks. So from the 4th to the 6th of April 2024, Feather Stitch House will be at the Craft for Crafters Stitching for All show at West Point Arena in Exeter. Now, this is the biggest show we've ever attended. We're really nervous, but we're very, very excited as well. We're going to be at stand 111. We're going to be one of dozens of other stitching related stalls that are at that show, and I'm going to be demonstrating embroidery skills throughout each of the days. We'll have all our kits there that are all available on our website, and some of them will be available at special show prices that we don't offer anywhere else. We also have some show only kits that we only take to craft shows, so if you want to check out those, you can come along. I'll have the 2023 quilt hopefully finished, but almost finished if not, as well as some of my own textile art. And if you're able and are in the area over that weekend, I would absolutely love it if you popped by, showed me your Winging It projects, and came and said hello. So hopefully I will see you at the Craft for Crafters Stitching for All show, West Point Arena in Exeter, 4th to the 6th of April 2024.
Okay, I've put in all my stems for my lungwort. That's coming out in lots of different directions. So that's all there, and there's the forsythia branches up nice and close. Now I want to add some extra flowers, and I want to add in a little bit more purple. So I've got this lovely variegated Anchor pearl cotton. I think it is shade 1325. If you can find that, it's got sort of pinks and blues and purples in it, and I thought we could add some lazy daisies. I mentioned that we do this last week, so I'm going to stitch over some of our background stitching. I'm not bothered by that at all, but I thought I could start by showing you one in this space here. So what we're going to do is make a series of detached chain stitches worked in a circle. So I'm bringing my thread up at the centre. I want to take my needle back down in the same place where that thread came up, and I'm going to tip it towards myself. making sure the needle comes up inside that loop that we've created. And when I pull through, that loop gets caught on the working thread and forms a sort of teardrop shape, and I want to hop over the thread of that loop and take my needle back down on the other side, pull through, and that just puts a little stitch that holds that loop in place. So now I'll come up at the centre again. If you want to, you could work these in opposites, but I'm just going to work my way around. So I've brought my needle up at the centre again, I'm going to go down in the same place, and I'm going to make another detached chain stitch coming off at a different angle, like that. And then back up at the centre, form my loop, go back down in the same place, rock out inside that loop, pull through. These are going to make some lovely variegated flowers that I think will just look lovely on this piece, and hopefully the variegations will tie together the colour scheme. So having a thread with lots of the different colours that you've used on it has a lovely harmonising effect on your piece. So I'm going to try and make 5 stitches fairly evenly spaced around a circle. And you don't want to pull too tight, pull that one a little bit tight. So if you do, just loosen it back off. You have to loosen your anchor stitch, pull on the loop, and then pull the anchor stitch back down. If you pull too tight, your loop will close up and you'll end up with a bit of a line. So I'm gonna rock out, pull through, and catch that loop down, and that is a lazy daisy. So detached chain stitches worked around a circle, all springing from the same point at the centre. Now we'll come back and do centres a little bit later, but you can vary the size of these. So most of the flowers that we've used are based on actual flowers. These are kind of invented, but it's just a bit of slow stitch now that we're adding to add some stitch detail to our panel. So you can make them in all sorts of different sizes. You can do even numbered petals, odd numbered petals. You could work your petals really close together, so you get more of sort of like a chrysanthemum, or like more like a daisy. These are kind of blossom flowers, if you like. That's the sort of inspiration. But I'm just playing around with some stitch, and I'm just going to dot these around to blend out these manipulated fabric flowers into the background a little bit more. You just move your manipulated flowers out of the way so that you can get your daisies in. So I'm going to pepper some of those around, and then I'll come back and show you what it's looking like. I've put in some little clusters of those daisy flowers, lacy daisies, and I've got some of this like a very pale, I don't know what to describe it as. It's like a vanilla colour. It's it's off-white, and if you put it with yellows it looks yellow, looks like a cream, and if you put it with purples it looks almost pink, and so it's one of those strange neutrals that changes. And I want to put in something approximating hawthorn blossom, and I'm going to do this again on just stitching over backgrounds, but I've got a different texture of thread, different weight of thread, and I think it's going to look quite nice. And what I'm going to do is just create some little starbursts. So these are just straight stitches in a similar way to the Lazy Daisy. We're just going to work them in a circle, and I'm just going to put 6 straight stitches all coming to the same point at the centre, and I'm just going to put in some clusters of these. Trying to avoid my knot on the back. So again, I'm just coming up at the outside and going to what will be the centre point, then coming back out to the outside, coming back to the centre point, out to the outside, back to the centre point, and I'm just turning my work if I need to as I go. Sometimes it's easier to do it in 2 motions, you can follow the angles a little bit better. I really love this layering of stitching. It's no problem to me at all that I've already stitched this space. I think layered stitching looks really lovely, and I do it all the time. I know some people don't really like stitching over what they've already stitched, but I think it just gives your piece of work just real depth. It looks like there are layers of flowers. So if you looked at a garden, things don't all grow on one plane. There are some things behind others, and yeah, as things grow you can see other things growing behind them and through gaps, and so that's what we're trying to create here. We want it to look like a burst of growth. A floral burst is what we titled the video, I think, in week 2. So we want to create this sense that there's a burst of growth and a flash of colour, and there's just life bursting out of this piece. So that's why I'm layering stitches over each other. If you don't want to do that, you don't actually have to add any stitching on at all, but you can create texture and depth in lots of other ways. Now we've got a 5-week month this month, so I do have another week to work on this, and we're going to add some more embellishments next week that are just going to bring all the finishing touches. And if you've been watching my videos for a while, you could probably have a guess at what those finishing touches are, because I've got a very strong feeling that a piece isn't quite complete. Textile art is not quite complete without a certain embellishment, so you can probably guess at what we're going to add next week. And yeah, hopefully this is going to be just a panel that is full of life and vibrance and colour. So I've got these little sprays of starburst flowers. They're really simple, so I'm all about using the simplest of stitches to create as many different effects as I possibly can. So we've got a little burst of star shaped flowers, and I don't want them to just sit on their own. So I'm just going to finish off that thread, knot it again, and we're going to bring a couple in amongst these blossoms as well, because I want them to look like they're all growing together rather than in separate patches. Now, if you don't want to do it like this, you could use a star stitch, which is a diagonal cross stitch with a vertical horizontal cross stitch sitting over the top of it. You can always put a little stitch across the centre to catch everything down if you want to. So that's another type of stitch that you can use to create a very similar effect. But I quite like the little hole that this creates at the centre. So I'm just looking at the space and seeing where a bit of contrast or colour is needed. This is all about exercising judgment. I mean, you could stitch this forever, but we don't want to overdo it. So it's as much about knowing when to stop as what to put where. So if you're coming into autumn or you're still in a lot of snow, I know there's a couple of people watching in Canada who have said that they are still covered in snow. This is where you could use some of these stitches to create snowflakes or a suggestion of frost. There's loads of ways that you can use these stitches. I think look at them, see what they remind you of, and you can adapt them. Oh, that was nearly a catastrophe, caught my corner there. See what they remind you of and use them to reflect something that's happening in your part of the world. So if you can see, I've got white here and white here. I feel like I just need something up here to bring that colour out into the green space, and there's a space there between those starbursts that I did in the green thread that's just got no stitching on it, so I don't want it to feel left out. So if we just put a little starburst in here that just sneaks over that one. There we go, that's better. It just brings that colour out. So I'm going to do the same along this bottom edge, maybe put a couple down here as well, and then we'll come back and put our final touch on for this week. Okay, so there's my little white stars, and I think the last thing we're going to do today is add a little bit of yellow into this space. So I've got some bright yellow thread here. This is another sheepy's thread, and we're just going to add some French knots, just little sprays of French knots. So I'm going to bring my needle through from the back like that. We have covered these before, but I'll just show you again, and I'll show you two different ways of doing them. One is a nice tight French knot. So to get that, we want to hold our thread towards ourselves, needle on the thread, wrap over a couple of times, and then you want to take your needle down close to but not exactly where it came up, otherwise you just pull your knot through, and you want to keep tension on that thread so that the wraps go down to the surface of the fabric, and you want to hold on to that thread, keeping it under tension until the very last minute. Then you let it go and you get a nice tight French knot. So I'll just do that again. So through from the back, thread towards us, wrap over, back down through the fabric, keeping tension on the working thread. Tension until the very last minute. Getting a bit tangly. Again, my thread's far too long. Let's do that one more time so it's a bit clearer. So thread towards us, needle on the surface, wrap over, back down through the fabric, keeping tension on the thread, and pull through. That one was a little bit more straightforward. Now you can, I will carry on with those, but I want to do a slightly different French knot in a different place. So let's put a loopy French knot over here. So I'm coming up from the back. So we make it in pretty much the same way. Thread towards us, wrap over the needle, but this time I'm going to not keep any tension on the thread. So I'm just going to take my thread through. You can see those wraps are not tight around the needle at all. They look like a bit of a mess. And I pull through and I end up with a loopy French knot, and that gives a really different effect. So I can combine these together. I can do some very neat ones, like that, and then put the odd loopy one in, and however loose your wraps are on the needle, that will be how loose your French knot is. So that first one was very loose, that one is a little bit less loopy. Let's do another super loopy one. So just let the thread do what it likes. You don't put any tension on, just keep it flying free as you pull through, and you'll get a very different sort of French knot. So we're just going to scatter some yellow in amongst what we've stitched, just to bring in some of that yellow into that background embroidered space. So we're going to do some loose French knots paired with the more precise, tighter ones. And you can play around with thread here. So sometimes I'm wrapping 3 times, sometimes I'm wrapping twice, and I might sometimes just wrap once. Let's try one with one wrap. Just keeping it nice and tight around the needle. Pull through and you get a really small, tight French knot, and we just want some of these scattered through, almost like, I suppose, pollen floating about in the air. Absolutely fine. So that's the sort of effect I want to create, and I'm going to scatter some of my loopy and tight French knots throughout, and then I'll come back and show you where we're up to for week 4. Here's where we're up to at the end of week 4. So we've put in our stems for our forsythia and for the lungwort, and then we've added some really simple stitch to extend our floral spray out into the background and add more texture and depth and detail, and I am just loving the way this one's going. It just makes me really happy. It's so bright, so hopeful, and yeah, I think it's heading in a really lovely direction. So we're going to finish this off next week. Probably going to add in a few leaves here and there. I did put a couple in. I don't know if you can see them. There's one here, and I think I've got one up here next to this crocus. So I think we're just going to put in a couple of leaves to add in a bit more green and just add those finishing touches and bind it just like the others. So I hope that you will join me again next week to see how this piece is going to turn out. Can't wait to see your interpretations. So you can share in the Facebook group like I said earlier, or you can share on Instagram. Just use hashtag FSHwingingit24. And if you do share, don't forget to tag me in at Feather Stitch House so that I'm guaranteed to see your creations. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great week, and if you want more inspiration like this, I will link a video here and here so that you can go and carry on your stitching fun. Have a great week, and I'll see you soon. Bye.